The final day of the challenge arrived with unexpected weather. Dark clouds rolled in overnight, and by morning, rain was falling steadily across Fort Bragg. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees, and the training grounds were quickly turning into mud. It was miserable conditions for combat training, which meant it was perfect conditions for testing real capabilities. Colonel Harrison assembled both teams in a briefing room, rain drumming against the windows. His face was serious as he pulled up a tactical map on the screen behind him. "Gentlemen, today's exercise is the culmination of everything we've worked on this week. We have a simulated hostage rescue scenario. Intelligence indicates that 3 high-value targets are being held in a compound approximately 5 kilometers from here. The compound is defended by an unknown number of hostile forces. Your mission is to infiltrate, neutralize all threats, secure the hostages, and extract them safely." He paused, looking between the American and British teams. "Here's the difference. Today you're not competing. You're one unified team. Sergeant Torres will command the American element. Sergeant Major Ashford will command the British element. You will need to coordinate your actions, support each other, and function as a single unit. This is the real test of what you've learned this week." Michael felt his stomach tighten. This was it. Not a competition, but a collaboration. He glanced at William, who met his eyes and nodded. They would need to work together, trust each other, and combine their strengths if they wanted to succeed. The briefing continued with details about the compound layout, known enemy positions, and extraction options. Colonel Harrison emphasized that this would be the most complex scenario of the week, with role players acting as hostile forces and multiple complications built into the exercise. After the briefing, Michael and William huddled together to plan their approach. The rain continued outside, and they could see soldiers preparing equipment through the windows. "What are you thinking?" William asked, spreading a detailed map of the compound on the table. Michael studied it carefully. 2 entry points. Your team takes the north side, my team takes the south. We hit them simultaneously, create confusion, and push toward the center where the hostages are likely held. William considered this. Solid approach, but I'd suggest a modification. What if we use a smaller element? That evening, Michael sat in the mess hall with James and a few other soldiers from their unit. The mood was somber, a stark contrast to the confident swagger they had displayed that morning. Trays of food sat mostly untouched as the men processed what had happened during the day's events. Private Danny Morrison, a young soldier who had joined the unit 6 months ago, broke the silence. "I don't understand. They just stand around guarding a palace all day. How are they so fit?" Corporal Rodriguez, a veteran with 12 years of service, shook his head slowly. "We made assumptions. That was our first mistake. Just because they have a ceremonial role doesn't mean that's all they do." Michael pushed his mashed potatoes around his plate, his mind replaying the day's events. After the physical fitness test, they had moved on to weapons qualifications. The British team had outshot them on the rifle range by significant margins. William had scored perfect marks at distances that would challenge even the best marksmen in their unit. Then came hand-to-hand combat demonstrations, and once again, the guards had displayed skills that seemed almost superhuman. James leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "My grandfather fought in World War II. He always said never underestimate the British military. I thought he was just being nostalgic about wartime alliances. Now I get it." "Tomorrow's the obstacle course," Michael said quietly. "That's our specialty. We run those courses every week. We know every wall, every rope, every mud pit." Rodriguez nodded, but there was doubt in his eyes. "Yeah, but we thought today was our specialty too. Torres, I've seen you max out PT tests for years. That British Sergeant Major made you look like a rookie." The words stung, because they were true. Michael had always been proud of his physical fitness. He worked hard to maintain it, pushed himself constantly. Yet William had made it look effortless. There was something humbling and frustrating about that reality. Across the mess hall, the British team sat together at their own table. They were talking quietly, occasionally laughing at something one of them said. They did not look smug or arrogant. They looked like regular soldiers unwinding after a long day. That somehow made it worse. They had dominated every single event. Now they were acting like it was just another Tuesday. Sleep did not come easily for Michael that night. He lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, thoughts racing. His pride was wounded, yes, but something else bothered him more. He had spent 8 years believing he was among the best soldiers in the world. The 82nd Airborne was legendary. They were America's Guard of Honor, always ready to deploy at a moment's notice. Yet here he was, being thoroughly outperformed by men, whose primary jobs seemed to be standing still and looking impressive for tourists. The next morning came too quickly. The soldiers assembled at the obstacle course at dawn, the air still cool and damp with dew. The course stretched out before them, a brutal collection of walls, ropes, tunnels, and barriers designed to test every aspect of physical and mental toughness. Michael had run this course hundreds of times. He knew exactly where to place each hand, where to jump, where to roll. Colonel Harrison stood on a raised platform overlooking the course. Today's challenge is simple. 2-man teams will run the course together. Your time starts when both team members cross the start line and ends when both cross the finish line. The team with the best combined time wins the day. We'll be mixing American and British pairs. Michael's heart sank slightly. Mixed teams meant he could not rely on the advantage of knowing the course. He would be paired with someone who had never seen it before. But maybe that was good. Maybe working with one of the British soldiers would help him understand how they were so effective. The colonel read out the pairings. Torres and Ashford, your team 3. Michael's stomach tightened. He was paired with William, the sergeant major, who had embarrassed him on the pull-up bar yesterday. He walked over to where William stood, trying to keep his expression neutral. "It's like we're partners," William said, extending his hand. Michael shook it, noting the firm grip. "Yeah, look, I know this course inside and out. If you follow my lead, we can get a good time." William smiled slightly, not unkindly. "I appreciate that, Sergeant Torres. But perhaps we should discuss strategy together. 2 heads are better than 1, as they say." There it was again. That calm confidence that seemed unshakable. Michael nodded, trying not to let his irritation show. They walked to the starting line as the first team began their run. Michael watched critically, noting where they gained time and where they struggled. When their turn came, Michael and William stood side by side at the line. The whistle blew, and they were off. The first obstacle was an 8-foot wall. Michael hit it at a run, using his momentum to scale it quickly. He expected to have to wait for William at the top. Instead, the British sergeant major appeared beside him almost instantly. Having cleared the wall with practiced ease, they dropped down together and sprinted toward the next obstacle. A series of low barriers they had to crawl under through mud and water. Michael dove under the first one, his elbows digging into the cold mud. He could hear William beside him, moving with the same efficiency. They emerged on the other side, covered in filth, kept running. The rope climb came next, a 30-foot rope hanging over a water pit. Michael grabbed it and started pulling himself up hand over hand. His arms were already tired from the day before, and each pull felt heavier than it should. He glanced over and saw William ascending his own rope with that same frustrating ease. Using a technique that seemed to require half the effort, at the top, Michael rang the bell and started his descent. His hands were slipping on the wet rope, his grip weakening. Halfway down, his hand slid off completely. He fell, hitting the water hard. The impact knocked the wind out of him. He came up sputtering and gasping. William was already at the edge of the pit, reaching down. "You all right, mate?" Michael ignored the offered hand and pulled himself out, embarrassment burning in his chest. "I'm fine. Let's keep moving." They continued through the course, tackling each obstacle in sequence. The cargo net, the balance beam, the tunnel crawl, the tire run. With each challenge, Michael noticed something remarkable. William adapted to obstacles he had never seen before with incredible speed. He assessed, adjusted, and executed perfectly. But more than that, he kept pace with Michael, never rushing ahead, never falling behind. When Michael struggled, William was there, offering a hand or a word of encouragement without making it feel like pity. By the time they reached the final obstacle, the 12-foot wall that required teamwork to overcome, Michael was exhausted. His muscles screamed in protest, his lungs burned, and his pride was in tatters. William looked tired too, finally showing some signs of strain. But he was still focused and ready. "I'll boost you up first," Michael said. Taking position at the base of the wall, William shook his head. "I'm heavier. Makes more sense for you to go up first than help pull me over." Michael wanted to argue, wanted to prove he could still do something better, but the logic was sound. He nodded, placing his foot in William's cupped hands. The British sergeant major lifted him with surprising strength, and Michael grabbed the top of the wall, pulling himself over. He turned immediately, reaching back down for William. William took a short run and jumped, catching Michael's outstretched hand. Together, they pulled until William reached the top. They dropped down the other side in unison and sprinted for the finish line, crossing it together. Their time was good, second best of all the teams so far. As they stood there catching their breath, Michael realized something that made him feel worse than any physical exhaustion could. William had not tried to show him up. He had run the course as a true teammate, supporting and encouraging rather than competing. That respect, that professionalism, was harder to face than any defeat. Later that afternoon, Colonel Harrison called for a break and announced that the evening would be dedicated to cultural exchange and informal discussions. The soldiers were encouraged to interact, share experiences, and learn from one another. The competitive atmosphere of the morning gave way to something more relaxed. Though tension still lingered beneath the surface, Michael found himself sitting with William and a few other soldiers from both teams around a picnic table near the barracks. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. James had brought out a cooler of cold sodas, and someone else had contributed a bag of chips. It felt almost like a normal social gathering, except for the weight of the past 2 days hanging over them. "So what's the deal?" James finally asked, his curiosity getting the better of his pride. "How does a ceremonial guard unit become so combat-ready? I thought you guys mostly did palace duty and changed shifts for tourists." William smiled and took a sip of his soda before answering. "That's a common misconception, and honestly, we don't mind it. The ceremonial duties are important, and we take them seriously. But that's only a small part of what we do. Every soldier in the Grenadier Guards is first and foremost an infantry soldier. We deploy on combat operations just like any other unit." One of William's team members, a stocky soldier named Corporal Davies, leaned forward. "I did 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq before I ever stood guard at a palace. The ceremonial role is an honor, but it's earned through operational service and exceptional performance." Michael felt his understanding shift. These were not parade ground soldiers playing at being warriors. They were experienced combat veterans who happened to also perform ceremonial duties. The distinction was crucial, and he felt foolish for not realizing it sooner. "The physical training is constant," William continued. "When we're on ceremonial duties, we train harder because we have to maintain perfect physical condition. Standing at attention for hours in heavy wool uniforms and bearskin caps requires incredible core strength and stamina. Then we go to the gym and train like any infantry unit. When we deploy, we need to be ready for anything." Rodriguez whistled low. "How heavy is that bearskin cap you guys wear?" "About 1.5 pounds, Davies replied. "Doesn't sound like much until you're wearing it in summer heat for 2 hours straight without moving. Try holding a bottle of water on your head without moving for even 5 minutes. Now imagine doing it while staying perfectly still, maintaining posture, and staying alert for potential threats." Michael had never thought of it that way. What looked like simple standing was actually an intense test of physical and mental discipline. The tourists who took pictures and tried to make the guards laugh had no idea of the strength required to maintain that position. "Tell them about selection," another British soldier said. This one was younger, maybe mid-20s, with a Scottish accent. His name was Private McGregor. William nodded. "Selection for the guards is rigorous. Beyond the standard infantry training, we have additional requirements. The fitness standards are higher, the discipline expectations are stricter, and the competition is fierce. For every soldier who makes it into the guards, several others don't meet the standards. We have to be able to switch from ceremonial duties to combat operations without missing a beat." James shook his head in admiration. Man, we really had you guys all wrong. We thought you were going to be all polish and no substance. We get that a lot, William said without any hint of resentment. The Americans aren't the first to underestimate us, and you won't be the last. But that's partly the point of these exchanges. We learn from each other. Your airborne techniques are excellent, by the way. The way you approach rapid deployment situations is something we can take back and incorporate into our own training. Michael appreciated the compliment, even if it felt a bit hollow after being outperformed for 2 days straight. Still, there was something genuine in William's tone. He was not just being polite. He actually respected their skills, even while demonstrating superior ones. Can I ask you something? Michael said, looking directly at William. That pull-up yesterday. 73 reps. How is that even possible? William laughed, a genuine sound that made him seem more human and less like a superhuman training machine. Years of practice and a specific training regimen. But honestly, Torres, I was showing off a bit. The goal was to make a statement on day one. Probably not my finest moment of sportsmanship, the admission surprised Michael. It was honest and self-aware in a way he had not expected. You wanted to get in our heads? I wanted to establish that we were serious competitors, yes, William admitted. But I also pushed myself harder than I normally would. I paid for it last night. My shoulders are killing me. The group laughed, and some of the tension finally broke. They spent the next hour trading stories from deployments, comparing training methods, and discussing the different approaches their respective militaries took to various situations. Michael learned that the British Army had a strong emphasis on adaptability and decision-making at lower ranks, encouraging soldiers to think independently and adjust to changing circumstances. As the evening wore on and the stars came out, Michael found himself actually enjoying the conversation. William was not the arrogant opponent he had built up in his mind. He was a professional soldier with years of experience, a dedication to excellence, and a genuine interest in learning from others, even while teaching them. Tomorrow's live-fire exercises, Rodriguez said, bringing everyone back to the reality of the challenge. Squad tactics and coordination. William's expression grew more serious. That's where the real test begins. Individual skills are important, but combat is won by teams working together. We'll see how well our units can cooperate under pressure. Michael felt a flutter of nervousness in his stomach. If the British team was this good individually, how would they perform as a coordinated unit? His own squad was experienced and well-trained, but they had been shaken by the past 2 days. Confidence mattered in combat situations, even training scenarios, and their confidence had taken a serious hit. The group began to break up as soldiers headed to their bunks for the night. Michael stood to leave, but William caught his arm gently. Torres, can I speak with you for a moment? Michael nodded, and they walked a short distance away from the others. The night air was cool, and crickets chirped in the grass around them. William's face was partially shadowed, but his eyes reflected the light from the nearby building. I wanted to apologize if I came across as harsh or dismissive during the obstacle course, William said. That wasn't my intention. You're a good soldier, and you ran that course well. The fact that I've done similar courses 1,000 times gives me an advantage in reading terrain and obstacles. Michael was taken aback. He had expected criticism or advice, not an apology. You don't need to apologize. You were better than me. That's just the truth. Aim, perhaps, William said. But better at what? Running obstacle courses? Doing pull-ups? Those things matter, certainly, but they're not the measure of a soldier's worth. You've been in combat. You've led men under fire. You have experience and instincts that can't be measured on a fitness test. I saw how you assessed each obstacle before attempting it, how you planned your approach. That's combat thinking, and it's valuable. Michael did not know what to say. The compliment felt genuine, and it soothed some of the wounded pride he had been carrying. Thanks. That means something coming from you. Tomorrow will be different, William continued. We'll be working together, not against each other. I'm looking forward to seeing your squad in action. From what I've heard, the 82nd Airborne has an exceptional reputation for a reason. They shook hands, and Michael headed back to his bunk with a lighter heart. He still felt the sting of being outperformed, but it was tempered now by respect and understanding. These British soldiers were not showing off or trying to humiliate anyone. They were simply being the best soldiers they could be, just as Michael tried to be every day, as he lay in his bunk that night. Michael thought about what William had said. Individual performance mattered, but teamwork mattered more. Tomorrow would be a chance to show what his unit could really do when they worked together. Dawn broke over the live-fire range with a red sky that promised heat later in the day. Michael stood with his squad, checking his weapon and mentally preparing for what lay ahead. Today would be different from the previous days. Instead of individual competitions, they would be running tactical scenarios as complete units. Communication, coordination, and strategy would be more important than raw physical ability. Colonel Harrison briefed both teams together. Today's exercise involves a series of tactical scenarios using live ammunition and simulated explosives. Each team will assault fortified positions, conduct building clearances, and respond to ambush situations. Safety is paramount. Follow all range protocols. This is as close to real combat as training gets. The first scenario involved clearing a mock village compound that had been set up on the far side of the range. Intelligence indicated enemy combatants were holding a position inside. The mission was to neutralize the threat and secure the area. Michael's team would go first, with the British team observing. Then they would switch, and the Americans would watch. Michael gathered his squad for a quick brief. James would be his second in command. Rodriguez would lead the first fire team, and Corporal Davis would lead the second. They had practiced urban combat scenarios countless times, but knowing they were being evaluated by the British team added pressure. "Remember our training," Michael said, looking each man in the eye. "Clear your corners, communicate constantly, and trust your partner. We've done this before. We're good at this. Let's show them what the 82nd can do." The whistle sounded, and they moved out. Michael led from the front, his rifle at the ready. They approached the compound using proper cover and concealment, moving from position to position in coordinated bounds. Rodriguez's team provided covering fire while Michael's team advanced. The pop of blank ammunition filled the air, mixing with the shouts of soldiers communicating positions and movements. They reached the outer wall of the compound. Michael signaled for a breach point, and two soldiers moved up with a battering ram. The door splintered inward, and they flowed inside, weapons up, scanning for targets. Pop-up silhouettes appeared in windows and doorways, and the soldiers engaged them with controlled bursts. Michael moved through the ground floor, his squad spreading out to clear each room systematically. The training kicked in automatically. Check the corners, watch for danger areas, never silhouette yourself in doorways or windows. They moved like a machine, each soldier knowing his role and executing it precisely. A pop-up target appeared suddenly in a dark corner, and Michael fired twice, center mass. His round struck true, and the target dropped. Behind him, James cleared the next room, while Rodriguez's team secured the stairwell. The entire operation took 12 minutes from start to finish. When they emerged from the compound, all targets were neutralized, and no soldier had made any critical safety errors. Colonel Harrison nodded approvingly. "Good run, gentlemen. That was solid work." Michael felt a surge of pride. They had performed well, and it showed. His squad moved to the observation area as the British team prepared for their attempt. Michael watched carefully, curious to see how William's unit would approach the same scenario. The British team moved out. Immediately, Michael noticed differences in their approach. They were quieter, their movements even more measured. William used hand signals almost exclusively, maintaining noise discipline that was impressive. They advanced on the compound using slightly different routes, taking advantage of dead space and covered approaches that Michael's team had not fully utilized. When they breached the door, their entry was explosive and overwhelming. They poured into the building with such speed and aggression that it was almost startling to watch. Yet, despite the speed, their movements were controlled and precise. They cleared rooms faster than Michael's team had, but without any loss of thoroughness. Michael watched in fascination as the British team demonstrated techniques he had never seen before. Their room-clearing method was slightly different, with angles of entry that seemed to provide better coverage. Their communication was minimal, but effective, relying on practiced coordination rather than constant verbal updates. When they finished, the British team had completed the scenario in 9 minutes and 20 seconds, nearly 3 minutes faster than the American team. Colonel Harrison's expression remained neutral, but Michael could see the appreciation in his eyes. This was exceptional work by any standard. The second scenario was more complex. It involved a convoy ambush response, where the team would need to suppress enemy fire, evacuate casualties, and coordinate a fighting withdrawal. Michael's team performed well, executing their battle drills with the precision that came from months of practice. They managed the scenario in good time with no critical errors. The British team approached the ambush scenario differently. When the simulated attack came, their response was immediate and overwhelming. They laid down suppressive fire with an intensity that Michael found impressive, while simultaneously organizing casualty evacuation and preparing defensive positions. Their withdrawal was textbook perfect, with covering forces providing security, while the main element pulled back in stages. What struck Michael most was their calmness under pressure. Despite the chaos of the scenario, with explosions going off and targets popping up from multiple directions, the British soldiers maintained their composure completely. William's voice over the radio was steady and clear, giving orders that his team executed without hesitation. During lunch, the two teams sat together, reviewing the morning's performance. Colonel Harrison had praised both units but noted areas for improvement. Michael felt frustrated with himself. His team had done well, but the British team had done better. Again, "Your breach entry was excellent," William said to Michael as they ate. "The way you stacked up and flowed through that doorway was very smooth. I noticed you checked your corners perfectly every time." Michael nodded his thanks, but the compliment felt hollow. "You guys were faster." "Speed isn't everything," William replied. "We've trained these specific scenarios dozens of times at our facility in the UK. You're working on your home ground, which is actually harder because you know people are watching and judging you by familiar standards. We have the advantage of being visitors. Less pressure in some ways." Rodriguez joined the conversation. "That thing you did with the suppressive fire during the ambush, where you split your fire teams to create crossing lanes? That was smart. We should incorporate that." William smiled. "It's a technique we learned from our experiences in Afghanistan. Found it was effective for breaking contact with a determined enemy. But I noticed your casualty evacuation drill was faster than ours. The way you organized the stretcher team while still maintaining security was impressive." The conversation continued, with soldiers from both teams sharing insights and observations. Michael found himself engaged despite his frustration. There was genuine knowledge being exchanged here, professional techniques that could save lives in real combat situations. The afternoon brought more scenarios: room clearance with live grenades, long-range precision shooting, night vision operations. With each exercise, both teams performed at high levels. But the British team consistently showed slightly better execution and timing. The gap was not enormous, but it was real and measurable. By the time the sun began to set, Michael was physically and mentally exhausted. They had fired thousands of rounds, run through countless scenarios, and pushed themselves to their limits. His squad had performed well by any objective standard, but being consistently outperformed by the British team was wearing on everyone's morale that evening. Michael sat alone on the steps outside his barracks, watching the stars come out. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see William approaching. "Mind if I join you?" William asked. Michael shrugged, and William sat down beside him. They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the base settling down for the night around them. "I know this week has been difficult," William said quietly. "It's hard when your self-perception doesn't match reality. I've been there." Michael looked at him skeptically. When have you ever been outperformed like this?" William smiled sadly. "Afghanistan, 2009. We were training with a team of Canadian Special Forces. They made us look like amateurs. Every scenario, every exercise, they were better. Faster, smarter, more efficient. I went back to my bunk every night questioning everything I thought I knew about being a soldier. What did you do? I learned, William said simply. I swallowed my pride and accepted that there were things I didn't know, techniques I hadn't mastered. I asked questions. I watched carefully. I took what they taught us and incorporated it into my own skills. That experience made me a better soldier. Michael considered this. You're saying I should learn from getting beaten? I'm saying you should learn from working with skilled professionals, William corrected. You haven't been beaten, Torres? You've been challenged. There's a difference. Tomorrow is the final exercise, a combined operation where our teams work together. That's when you'll really see what matters. The final day of the challenge arrived with unexpected weather. Dark clouds rolled in overnight, and by morning, rain was falling steadily across Fort Bragg. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees. The training grounds were quickly turning into mud. It was miserable conditions for combat training, which meant it was perfect conditions for testing real capabilities. Colonel Harrison assembled both teams in a briefing room, rain drumming against the windows. His face was serious as he pulled up a tactical map on the screen behind him. Gentlemen, today's exercise is the culmination of everything we've worked on this week. We have a simulated hostage rescue scenario. Intelligence indicates that 3 high-value targets are being held in a compound approximately 5 kilometers from here. The compound is defended by an unknown number of hostile forces. Your mission is to infiltrate, neutralize all threats, secure the hostages, and extract them safely. He paused, looking between the American and British teams. Here's the difference. Today, you're not competing. You're one unified team. Sergeant Torres will command the American element. Sergeant Major Ashford will command the British element. You will need to coordinate your actions, support each other, and function as a single unit. This is the real test of what you've learned this week. Michael felt his stomach tighten. This was it. Not a competition, but a collaboration. He glanced at William, who met his eyes and nodded. They would need to work together, trust each other, and combine their strengths if they wanted to succeed. The briefing continued with details about the compound layout, known enemy positions, and extraction options. Colonel Harrison emphasized that this would be the most complex scenario of the week, with role players acting as hostile forces and multiple complications built into the exercise. After the briefing, Michael and William huddled together to plan their approach. The rain continued outside and they could see soldiers preparing equipment through the windows. "What are you thinking?" William asked, spreading a detailed map of the compound on the table. Michael studied it carefully. 2 entry points. Your team takes the north side. My team takes the south. We hit them simultaneously, create confusion, and push toward the center where the hostages are likely held. William considered this. Solid approach, but I'd suggest a modification. What if we use a smaller element as a diversion? 3 or 4 soldiers create a noisy demonstration at the main gate, while our main forces breach at these 2 secondary points here and here. He pointed to locations on the map. The defenders will focus on the obvious threat, while we slip in from the flanks. Michael nodded slowly. It was a good modification. Rodriguez and McGregor could lead the diversion team. They're both experienced and won't get rattled if things go sideways. Agreed. Once we're inside, we need clear communication protocols. Radio discipline will be critical with this, many soldiers operating in the same space. They spent the next hour refining their plan, anticipating problems, and establishing contingency procedures. Michael found himself impressed by William's tactical thinking. The British sergeant major asked good questions, challenged assumptions without being confrontational, and brought insights from his own combat experience. This was collaboration in its truest form, by the time they briefed their combined teams. Michael felt confident in their approach. The soldiers listened intently, asking clarifying questions and offering suggestions based on their observations during the week. James pointed out a potential blind spot in their approach route. Corporal Davies suggested a modification to their extraction plan that would save critical minutes. Remember, Michael told the assembled soldiers, "We're one team today. Americans and British working together. Watch each other's backs. Trust your training and communicate constantly." Let's show Colonel Harrison what we can do when we combine our strengths. The soldiers geared up in the rain, checking weapons and equipment with practiced efficiency. Michael adjusted his radio headset, tested his communications with William, and mentally ran through the plan one more time. The 5-kilometer approach to the compound would be conducted on foot through rough terrain in pouring rain. It would be exhausting before the actual assault even began. They moved out in 2 columns, spreading out to minimize their profile. The rain had not let up, and visibility was reduced to about 50 meters. Michael's boots sank into mud with each step, and water ran down his neck despite his best efforts to stay dry. This was combat conditions, uncomfortable and miserable. Exactly the kind of environment where training and discipline mattered most. After 90 minutes of hard movement, they reached their assembly area about 200 meters from the compound. Michael and William moved forward to conduct a leader's reconnaissance, crawling through the wet grass to get a closer look at their objective. Through binoculars, Michael could see the compound. It was larger than the training photos had suggested, with multiple buildings surrounded by a concrete wall. Guards were visible at several positions, and lights illuminated the main gate area. This was going to be challenging, there William whispered, pointing to a section of wall on the north side. That's our breach point. I see some damage in the concrete. Looks like it was repaired at some point. Probably weaker than the rest. Michael shifted his view to the south side. Same here. There's a drainage pipe coming through the wall. If we can get inside that, we might have direct access without having to breach at all. They crawled back to the assembly area and made final adjustments to their plan based on what they had observed. Rodriguez and McGregor would lead the diversion team, approaching the main gate with flashbangs and noise to draw attention. Michael's team would use the drainage pipe entrance while William's team breached the damaged section of wall on the north side. At exactly 1900 hours, the operation began. Rodriguez's team opened up with simulated gunfire and flashbangs at the main gate. The effect was immediate. Lights came on throughout the compound, and Michael could hear shouting as the defenders rushed to respond to the apparent threat. Michael led his team forward at a run, keeping low and using the darkness and rain as cover. They reached the drainage pipe, and Private Morrison squeezed inside first, his smaller frame making him the logical choice. Michael followed, pulling himself through the narrow concrete tube. It was claustrophobic and dark, with water flowing past him. But within seconds, he emerged inside the compound wall. His team flowed in behind him, weapons up and ready. Through his radio, he heard William's calm voice reporting that his team had successfully breached the north wall and was moving toward their first objective. Everything was going according to plan. Michael's team moved through the shadows between buildings. Avoiding the lights and the guards rushing toward the main gate, they reached the central building where intelligence suggested the hostages were being held. Michael signaled for a stack at the door, and his soldiers moved into position. The breach was textbook perfect. They flowed through the doorway, clearing the first room in seconds. Pop-up targets appeared, and his soldiers engaged them with precision. Down the hallway, up the stairs, checking every corner and every shadow. Michael's heart pounded, adrenaline surging through his system. But his training kept him focused. They found the first hostage in a locked room on the second floor. James breached the door, and Michael entered to find a role player with his hands bound, playing the part of a kidnapped civilian. "You're safe now," Michael said, cutting the plastic restraints. "Stay with Corporal Davis. He'll get you out." Over the radio, William reported finding the second hostage in the north building. One more to locate. Michael's team continued clearing rooms, moving with urgency, but not rushing. Rushing got people killed. Then everything went wrong. An explosion rocked the building. It's much larger than the simulated charges they had been using. Michael was thrown against a wall, his ears ringing. Smoke filled the hallway, and he could hear shouting. Through his radio came fragments of confused reports. "Contact north side. Multiple hostiles. We've got men down." Where's that explosion from? Michael forced himself to focus through the ringing in his ears. This was a scenario complication, something the trainers had thrown in to test their response to unexpected developments. He keyed his radio. "All elements report status." Reports came in. William's team had encountered a larger force of defenders than expected, and was pinned down in the north building. Rodriguez's diversion team was running low on ammunition. 2 soldiers from Michael's team had been marked as casualties by the safety observers. Michael made a quick decision. "Ashford, we're coming to you. Hold your position. Rodriguez, fall back to the rally point and prepare for extraction. My team will link up with the British element and complete the mission." He led his remaining soldiers through the smoke-filled compound toward Williams' position. They took fire from multiple directions, engaging targets as they appeared. The scenario had descended into chaos, exactly the kind of situation where training and leadership mattered most. They reached Williams' position to find the British team had taken cover behind a low wall, exchanging fire with role players in fortified positions. Williams' face was streaked with mud and rain, but his eyes were sharp and focused. "Good to see you, mate," Williams said with a tight smile. "We're in a bit of a spot here," Michael assessed the situation quickly. The third hostage was visible through a window in the building ahead, but getting to him would require crossing open ground under fire. It was a kill zone, and anyone who tried would be marked as a casualty immediately. "Suppressive fire," Michael said. "My team will lay down everything we have. Your team moves on my signal and gets that hostage. We'll cover your withdrawal." William nodded without hesitation. "On your mark." Michael positioned his soldiers and ensured they had clear fields of fire. Then he raised his hand. 3, 2, 1. Execute. His team opened fire with controlled bursts, aiming at every visible target position. The volume of fire was overwhelming, forcing the role players to take cover. In that moment, Williams's team sprinted across the open ground, breached the building, and disappeared inside. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Michael's soldiers kept up their suppressive fire, their ammunition running low. Then Williams' voice came over the radio. "We have the package. Coming out." The British team emerged with the third hostage, moving fast despite having to help the role player who was simulating an injury. Michael's team shifted their fire to cover the withdrawal, and both elements began moving toward the extraction point. The final phase of the mission was a fighting withdrawal through the compound and back to their rally point. Both teams moved together now, covering each other's movements, communicating constantly, functioning as one unified force. When defenders appeared, they were engaged and neutralized. When obstacles blocked their path, they adapted and found new routes. They reached the extraction point with all 3 hostages and most of their force intact. As they loaded into the waiting vehicles that would simulate their helicopter extraction, Michael felt a surge of accomplishment that had nothing to do with competition or comparison. They had completed an extremely difficult mission under adverse conditions by working together and trusting each other. Colonel Harrison was waiting at the debriefing area when they returned. His face showed nothing as both teams filed in, exhausted and covered in mud. Michael braced himself for criticism, certain they had made mistakes that would be highlighted in the after-action review. Colonel Harrison stood at the front of the debriefing room, his uniform somehow still crisp despite the weather outside. The assembled soldiers sat in chairs arranged in rows. Americans and British mixed together now rather than separated by nationality. Everyone was exhausted, muddy, and soaked through, but there was an energy in the room that had not been there before. "Gentlemen," the colonel began, his voice carrying clearly through the space, "that was one of the most challenging scenarios we've run at this facility. The weather was terrible, the complications were numerous, and we deliberately made the objectives as difficult as possible. We wanted to see how you would respond when everything did not go according to plan." He paused, and Michael braced himself for the criticisms he knew were coming. They had lost soldiers, burned through ammunition, and taken longer than the planned timeline. There were probably a dozen mistakes he had made that would be highlighted in the review. "What I saw today exceeded my expectations," Colonel Harrison continued. "When that simulated explosion hit, many teams would have fallen apart. Some would have panicked, others would have retreated to safety. Instead, you adapted. Sergeant Torres, your decision to reinforce Sergeant Major Ashford's position rather than continuing with your original plan showed excellent tactical judgment. You recognized where you were needed and acted decisively." Michael felt surprise wash over him. That had been a split-second decision, made under pressure with incomplete information. He had second-guessed it several times during the extraction. "Sergeant Major Ashford," the colonel said, turning to William, "your team's performance under fire was exceptional. When you were pinned down, you maintained discipline and waited for support rather than taking unnecessary risks. That patience saved lives even in a training scenario." William nodded his acknowledgement but said nothing. His face showed the same exhaustion that Michael felt. Colonel Harrison walked to the tactical map still displayed on the screen. "But what impressed me most was not individual performance. It was how quickly you merged into a unified team. By the time you reached that extraction point, I could not tell American soldiers from British soldiers. You were just soldiers working together toward a common goal. That is the point of these exchanges. That is what makes us stronger as allies." He turned back to face the assembled troops. "Over the past week, you've competed against each other, learned from each other, and ultimately fought alongside each other. The American team learned techniques and approaches from the British Guards that will make them more effective soldiers. The British team observed capabilities and methods from the 82nd Airborne that they can take back to their own units. Everyone in this room is better today than they were 7 days ago." The colonel's expression softened slightly. "I know this week was humbling for some of you. The American soldiers came in expecting one thing and encountered something very different. That is good. Humility makes us better. It opens our minds to new ideas and forces us to question our assumptions. There is no shame in being challenged by exceptional professionals." Michael felt the weight he had been carrying all week begin to lift. The colonel was right. He had been humbled, but he had also learned more in 7 days than he had in the previous year. He glanced at James, who was nodding slowly, a slight smile on his mud-streaked face. "Both teams performed at levels that would be considered excellent by any standard," Colonel Harrison said. "The British Grenadier Guards demonstrated why they are considered among the finest infantry soldiers in the world. The 82nd Airborne showed the adaptability, courage, and determination that has made them legendary since World War II. You should all be proud of what you accomplished this week." He paused, then added with the hint of a smile, "And yes, if we are keeping score, the British team did outperform the American team in most of the individual competitions. But that final mission, completed together, was worth more than all the other events combined. That is the real victory this week." The room erupted in applause, Americans and British clapping together. Michael found himself clapping too, looking over at William, who met his eyes and nodded with respect and acknowledgement. There was no arrogance in that expression, no gloating. Just mutual respect between professionals. After the formal debriefing ended, the soldiers gathered outside despite the rain, which had finally begun to lighten. There was a sense of camaraderie that had not existed at the beginning of the week. Soldiers who had been strangers 7 days ago were now exchanging contact information and promising to stay in touch. Michael found William standing alone, looking out over the training grounds. He walked over, his boots squelching in the mud. "Hell of a week," Michael said. William turned and smiled. "Indeed it was. Your team performed brilliantly today, Torres. The way you managed that chaotic situation was impressive." "We learned from watching you guys all week," Michael admitted. "That calmness under pressure, the way you adapt without panicking, that is not something you can teach in a classroom." "You already had those qualities," William said. "We just gave you a chance to see them tested in new ways. Your instincts are excellent. Trust them more." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun begin to break through the clouds in the distance. The storm was passing, leaving everything clean and fresh. "Can I ask you something?" Michael said. "Why did you push so hard those first few days? You could have competed without trying to dominate every single event." William considered the question carefully. "Honestly, because we always have to. The Grenadier Guards are constantly proving ourselves. People see the ceremonial uniforms and make assumptions. Other military units, even in our own country, sometimes don't take us seriously until we show them what we can do. We've learned that it is better to exceed expectations dramatically from the start than to spend weeks earning respect gradually." "That makes sense," Michael said, "but it was brutal on our confidence." "I know, and I apologize for that. It was not personal. We were not trying to humiliate anyone. We were simply being ourselves, performing at the level we trained to every day. The fact that it seemed exceptional to you says more about the different approaches our militaries take than about any real difference in potential." Michael thought about this. The American military was huge, with millions of soldiers spread across dozens of specialties and hundreds of bases. The British Army was much smaller, more selective. Different challenges required different approaches. "What will you take back with you?" Michael asked. William smiled. "Your airborne insertion techniques are remarkable. The way you coordinate rapid deployment from aircraft is something we need to study more. And your integration of technology and tactical operations is ahead of where we are. But more than specific techniques, I am taking back a deeper appreciation for American military culture. Your soldiers are encouraged to think independently, to question and adapt. That is valuable in modern warfare. And I am taking back about 100 new training ideas," Michael said with a laugh. "My squad is going to hate me when they see the new PT regimen I am planning." They both laughed, and the tension that had existed between them all week finally dissolved completely. They were not competitors anymore. They were colleagues, fellow professionals who had tested each other and come out stronger. Rodriguez approached with Davies and McGregor, all three grinning despite their exhaustion. "We're organizing an informal dinner off base tonight. A few of us want to grab some real food and continue the conversation outside of training mode. You two should come." Michael looked at William, who nodded. "We would be honored." That evening, a group of 12 soldiers, 6 American and 6 British, crowded into a barbecue restaurant in town. They filled a long table in the back, and for hours they ate, drank sodas, and shared stories. The conversation ranged from serious discussions of combat experiences to ridiculous anecdotes about training mishaps and memorable mistakes. James told a story about a training exercise in Poland where he had gotten lost in the woods and spent 6 hours trying to find his way back to base. McGregor countered with a tale about accidentally setting off a smoke grenade inside an armored vehicle during a transport to a royal event. The entire vehicle had filled with purple smoke, and they had arrived at Buckingham Palace, looking like they had been in a firefight with grape juice. The laughter was genuine and unforced. These were soldiers who understood each other in ways that civilians never could. The shared experiences of military life, the unique challenges and demands, created a bond that transcended national boundaries. As the evening wore on and the restaurant began to empty, Michael found himself reflecting on the transformation that had occurred over the past week. He had started out confident, maybe even arrogant, certain that American soldiers were the best in the world. He had been knocked down, humbled, and forced to confront the limits of his own abilities. But instead of being defeated by that experience, he felt energized. He had seen what was possible when soldiers trained to the absolute highest standards. He had learned new techniques, new approaches, new ways of thinking about tactical problems. Most importantly, he had gained a broader perspective on what military excellence actually meant. William caught his eye from across the table and raised his glass of soda in a subtle toast. Michael raised his own glass in response. No words were needed. They understood each other. The week had started with a challenge and a competition. It was ending with friendship and mutual respect. The British Royal Guards had stunned the American soldiers, not just with their physical capabilities, but with their professionalism, their dedication, and their willingness to share knowledge rather than simply dominate. As they left the restaurant that night, walking out into a clear, star-filled sky, Michael felt different than he had 7 days ago. He was still proud to be in the 82nd Airborne, still confident in his abilities. But now that confidence was tempered with humility and enriched by new knowledge. He was a better soldier than he had been, and he had the British Grenadier Guards to thank for that. The next morning, the British team prepared to depart. Their transport vehicles were loaded with gear, and soldiers moved with the efficient bustle of an impending departure. The American team had assembled to see them off, a gesture of respect that felt appropriate after the week they had shared. Colonel Harrison gave a brief speech thanking the British team for their participation and professionalism. Then he invited William to say a few words. The British Sergeant Major stepped forward, his uniform crisp and perfect despite the early hour. We came here to test ourselves against one of the finest military units in the world, William said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. We leave having found not just worthy opponents, but brothers in arms. The skills and courage we witnessed this week confirm everything we have always believed about American soldiers. It has been an honor to train with you, to learn from you, and to fight alongside you. We will carry the lessons from this week back to our own units and our own country. Thank you for your hospitality and your professionalism. The soldiers applauded, and Michael found himself clapping harder than he had expected to. As the British team began boarding their vehicles, soldiers from both sides exchanged final handshakes and quick embraces. There were promises to stay in touch, to share training updates, maybe even to arrange future exchanges. William approached Michael last. They shook hands firmly, and William said quietly, "You're a good soldier, Torres. A good leader. Trust yourself more. You have everything you need to be exceptional."
Thanks, Michael said, meaning it.
"And thanks for pushing us this week. We needed it, even if we didn't know it." "That's what allies do," William replied. "We make each other better." As the vehicles pulled away, carrying the British team back to their base and eventually back to the United Kingdom, Michael stood with his squad and watched them go. The week had changed him in ways he was still processing. He had been challenged, defeated, humbled, and ultimately elevated by the experience. James stood beside him, arms crossed, watching the vehicles disappear down the road. "So, what did we learn this week, Sergeant?" Michael thought about the question. "We learned that there's always someone better, always more to learn, always room to improve. We learned that pride can blind you to your own weaknesses. And we learned that real strength comes from being willing to admit you don't know everything." "Heavy thoughts for early morning?" James said with a smile. "Yeah," Michael agreed, "but true ones." As they walked back toward the barracks, Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose. The challenge was over, but the real work was just beginning. He had new training techniques to implement, new standards to strive for, new levels of excellence to pursue. The British Royal Guards had shown him what was possible. Now it was up to him to chase that standard and push his own soldiers to reach new heights. The week had started with no one seeing what was coming. It ended with everyone seeing more clearly than before. And that, Michael realized, was the real victory.